Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really complex region, Kashmir. It's constantly in the news, but honestly, the details can be pretty murky.
They really can. It's one of those issues with so many layers.
Exactly. So, we've gone through a recent podcast segment that gives a snapshot of the situation as it stands, around 2025.
A focused look, which is helpful.
Our goal here is pretty simple. Pull out the key information, the main takeaways, so you get a clear picture of what's going on, who's involved, and the different viewpoints there.
And you really can't understand the present without touching on the history.
Mhm.
The source we looked at rightly starts back in 1947.
The end of British rule.
Precisely. That's the moment this whole dispute essentially kicks off. India, Pakistan, both laying claim to Kashmir.
And that led to conflict, didn't it?
Oh, yes. Several wars.
Mm.
And crucially, no lasting resolution was ever reached.
Yeah.
That hangs over everything still. It's the essential backdrop.
Okay, right. So with that history in mind, absolutely crucial, as you said, let's jump to now. The source highlights 2019 as a major turning point, the revocation of Article 370.
Yes, that was huge. For anyone who may be not familiar, Article 370 gave Jammu and Kashmir a special status, some autonomy, its own constitution, sort of.
Except in certain areas like defense.
Right, defense, foreign affairs, communications, those were central. But this revocation, it removed that special status.
Mhm.
And the source points out this didn't exactly lead to peace and quiet.
No, quite the opposite according to the segment. It mentions increased tensions, armed conflicts continuing, political unrest.
And restrictions, big ones apparently, on communication, on the media.
Which makes you wonder, what was the aim there? From India's perspective, I mean.
Well, the way the source presents the Indian government's view is focused on stabilization.
Right.
Bringing the region into the fold, economically speaking.
How so?
Through investment. Things like infrastructure projects, highways, better internet access, also actively trying to promote tourism, get businesses in there.
Even tech companies.
Yeah, encouraging tech firms to set up offices. The narrative is definitely one of integration, development, bringing prosperity. India tends to view Kashmir as, well, an internal matter.
But then there's the other side. The source makes sure to bring in the local perspective, doesn't it?
It does, and that's vital. It talks about this feeling of disconnect among many Kashmiris.
Yeah.
They see the heavy military presence, the limits on, expressing themselves freely.
And maybe don't feel connected to those development projects.
Exactly. It creates a sense of alienation for many. It's a reminder that, well, progress looks very different depending on where you stand.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, let's widen the view. What about the rest of the world? How are other countries reacting? The UN, for instance.
The UN position, according to the source, is pretty consistent. They keep advocating for dialogue, direct talks between India and Pakistan.
So they still see it as an international issue, despite India's stance.
It seems that way, yes. The call is always for a bilateral solution, negotiated between the two main parties.
And what about, say, Western nations? The US, UK, EU countries.
Similar line, really. The source indicates they also push for those direct India-Pakistan talks, generally trying to avoid getting drawn in as a third party.
Like, let them sort it out themselves.
Kind of, yeah. The underlying idea seems to be that any lasting fix has to come from India and Pakistan themselves.
Okay. But that's not the only international perspective, is it? What about the OIC?
Ah, yes, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. That's quite different. The source highlights them. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey are members voicing real concern
About what specifically?
about alleged human rights violations in Kashmir. They've issued resolutions on it.
How does India respond to that?
Typically dismisses them. The source mentions India often calls these concerns misinformed, not based on facts on the ground. But it shows, a very different international take on the situation.
Right, so a real spectrum of reactions globally. Now, something else the source mentioned, these back-channel communications, what's that about?
Yeah, that's interesting. It suggests there are quiet talks happening, officials from India and Pakistan communicating, but not publicly.
Behind the scenes, could that be positive?
Potentially. The source hints it might lead to, perhaps, tensions easing slightly, maybe even reopening some old trade routes eventually. It offers a glimmer, you could say.
Just a glimmer, though.
Yes, yes. The source immediately adds a big caveat. Real peace is still far away. That's a direct quote, basically.
Okay, so temper the optimism. These talks are happening, maybe, but don't expect miracles overnight.
Exactly. It's a possible step towards de-escalation, but not necessarily a sign that the core issues are about to be resolved. It's tentative.
So putting it all together, Looking ahead, what's the path forward? Does the source offer any consensus view?
It touches on what analysts broadly agree on. Achieving peace there is incredibly difficult, hugely complex.
What would it take?
Real political will, for starters, from everyone involved, and genuine dialogue, not just going through the motions. But critically, the source emphasizes including Kashmiri voices.
The people actually living there.
Absolutely. The point made is that solutions can't just be imposed from New Delhi or Islamabad or, from outside powers. The people of Kashmir need to be part of the process.
That makes sense if you connect it back to that feeling of disconnect we talked about.
Precisely. Any peace that lasts has to address the needs, the worries, the aspirations of the people on the ground. Otherwise, it's probably not going to stick. Which leads to the question of how you effectively bring those voices in.
Right. So to quickly recap this deep dive based on the source segment, we've seen the deep historical roots going back to 47.
The massive shift after 2019 with Article 370's revocation leading to more tension.
India's focus on development versus local Kashmiri concerns about rights and that military presence.
The varied international reactions, the UN pushing dialogue, Western nations favoring bilateral talks, the OIC raising human rights alarms.
And these hints of back-channel talks, offering maybe a slight thaw, but with the strong reminder that real peace is, well, a long way off.
And for you listening, understanding Kashmir really is like a case study in these long, tangled conflicts that have global ripples. Seeing the history, the players, their different angles, it helps make sense of a complex piece of our world.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to chew on. We've heard about what governments are doing, what international bodies are saying based on this source. But perhaps the biggest question, the one that sticks, is how do the voices, the actual hopes and dreams of the Kashmiri people get truly heard and woven into whatever solution might one day emerge? How does that happen effectively?